Welcome, everybody, back here at Segal Talks at the Martin Segal Theater Center at the Graduate Center CUNY in New York City, Manhattan, at the City University. And another day in New York, and it's summer, it's hot, it's almost tropical here. And we are still inside that catastrophe movie where the reality is stranger than fiction, and we are part of it. It's like an absurdist Witkiewicz play or something, and we are still really in the middle of it. Again, 60,000 infections yesterday, and the Center for Disease Control says most probably the number of people who are infected is 13 times higher. So the 3.7 million are confirmed. It means actually 40 million people most probably in the United States. Numbers are stunning and shocking. It's the most in the world, and we have to see where this all is leading. We have such a strange week and irresponsible government. There's a deep distrust. People are out of job over the time. 45 million applied for job insurance. They lost their jobs. New York City lost 1 million jobs. Restaurants are closing, stores are closing. If you go down to the streets, it's empty. A friend who lives close to 8th Avenue and 36th Street says, people who are released from prison are in all the hotels. The city bought the hotels out from 32nd Street to 56. People are outside, big groups, 40, 50 people on lawn chairs. He's like, I feel I'm not safe, I can go there. And people who were protected from Corona or maybe already had it, nobody knows. They have to have a curfew, have to be back at 5 or 6. So it's quite a strange time we live in. And then the scenes in Portland, there's for good reason civil unrest on the streets, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement galvanized it. But now the Homeland Security forces, as someone said, it looks like fascism for TV, for live TV. They are moving in. It's unprecedented times we go through. Nobody knows what's going on. But what we do is to talk to people where we think who always experience life and the present, anticipate the future, on the right side of social justice, on the right side of the complex fight for liberties and freedom. And these are artists. And in our case, these are theater artists, and we should listen to them much closer, what is on their mind, what they think about, and because it is of significance and might help us, our lives, the city, the country we're in, to really think through what is it all about. Today, we have with us another significant writer who has been at the Segal before, and he is, how would one say, is part of the landscape of New York City's theater. It's called Hancock Rux, and he is an American poet, playwright, novelist, essayist, actor, director, singer, and songwriter. He authored many books, and got an Obie Award for his play Talk, which is what he is also very much known for. He has 4 CDs recorded to his credit, and he has been supported by the Doris Duke Foundation, Doris Duke Award. He got the Bessie Award and many things on. He is a visiting artist at Yale University, and importantly, he's an associate director at the Mabou Mines Theater. And anybody who had the time and listened to Lee Brewer and Maud just last week knows what this great theater, this great work is about. The great Ruth Malachak, who we lost already earlier, who also often was visiting us. So Carl, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Big honor to have you with us. And I apologize for my lengthy speech because we also, it's about listening, but then I start talking, but hope you will forgive me. Carl, where are you now? And normally I say what time it is, but I guess you're somewhere close.
Right. So I'm in New York City. So I'm in the same city I think that you're in, right? Because are you in? Yeah. Yeah. I'm in New York City. I'm in Brooklyn. I live in Fort Greene.
What street?
Carl and Carlton. So I'm on Carlton Avenue. Very strange. That was a coincidence. That wasn't planned. And so, yeah, I'm not far from the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and you know that whole area. Yeah.
Mm.
So I'm
Wow.
home.
So how is it going for me? How are you experiencing this time?
In many ways, I mean, it's a very interesting time. It's very dystopian, and in a strange way, the dystopian is not unfamiliar to me. You know, it's in fact it endeared. You know, something about dystopian times have always fascinated me, whether they were real or imagined. You know, I I my particular neighborhood is very charming. It's always charming. It's always sort of a hip, you know, neighborhood with lots of restaurants and bars and things like that. But because of this coronavirus, a lot of restaurants have been, you know, seating outside. So there are lots of people who are, you know, seating outside, and there are lots of, and the bars you are not allowed to walk into. So the bars are serving from the doors or from windows, you know, right to the street, to the patrons on the street. So it feels very much like a cross between New Orleans and Paris right now, which is kind of nice. You know, I mean, it's almost like I wish that there are some things. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that there are some things that have happened during quarantine, or at least during this sort of pandemic, that sort of changed cultural and social norms that I wish will never go back to the way it used to be, you know, to the formal way that it used to be. I mean, I really love the idea that everybody, especially in the summer, is out on the street, you know, and that everybody's meeting, and, you know, and we're all, you know, everybody's together, and no one seems segregated, you know, in their own way. Of course, everyone is in masks and everyone is social distancing, and that's important. But there's a
Yeah, it looks like we lost audio for a second.
I can't not. Oh, my audio?
Now you're back. Can you say again the last sentence? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, I can't say that at this moment, I should say at this moment, my neighborhood is quite charming. I mean, the weather's hot but
You said that,
beautiful.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the people are out on the streets and, you know, congregating, you know.
Mm.
There's something about danger. There's something about danger that brings people together. I remember New York City during the 9/11 moment, and everybody came out of their houses, and it forced people to talk to each other and to meet each other, and this is doing the same in a way. Even though we're socially distancing, it's forcing people to kind of come together. So there's something about these kinds of tragedies that affect all of our lives that force us to communicate and to have interaction with each other in ways in which we normally don't. Because especially in cities like New York City, where it's a very crowded city, it's a very busy city, and people tend to be, you know, in their own bubbles. They tend to be, you know, all sort of on their own paths, and, you know, barely have time to say hello, you know, or to stop and to sit and to talk. And right now there's a lot of sitting and stopping and talking. And that's the world that I thrive in.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So where were you when it started, when it happened?
I was here. I was here in New York City. I was here in Brooklyn. I was, you know, the period of quarantine when everyone had to remain in their homes was very different from what I'm explaining right now, because, you know, it was around March, and so it got darker early. The weather was still a little cold. The streets were vacant for the most part. Um, you know, it was so quiet that it was eerily quiet, eerily quiet.
Mm.
And I just remained in the house for the most part, which, thank God, knock on wood, has kept me pretty safe. Now, I then found myself forced to join the world or to go outside. And I don't mean just for the normal things that one goes outside for, like shopping or things like that, but when the Black Lives Matter movement, started, I was getting a lot of calls, and I also felt compelled to join, that protest, and to be a part of it. And so I threw caution to the wind. I wore my mask, and I went out, and I marched with people. So I was there marching as well during the quarantine. And then in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, there was the first mural that was painted in New York City, the Black Lives Matter mural that was painted here. I was asked to inaugurate it at the unveiling, and so I spoke at that, and I went there, and the press was there, and so those have been my sort of outdoor activities for the most part.
What did you say? What did you say?
Well, one of the things I was saying was that letting people know. First, I was explaining what I think Black Lives Matter means, because I think there's a lot of confusion around that. I think there's a lot of confusion or misunderstanding around like what the phrase itself means. There's this idea that if there's an idea that the phrase Black Lives Matter means no other lives matter, and that's not true. The phrase is basically saying, please pay attention to the fact that Black and brown people have been disproportionately abused and suffering a certain kind of brutality and sudden death at the hands of police force in this country, and authoritarian rule in a way that other lives have not. And we need to pay attention to, we need to pay attention to this. It's no different than saying, save the whales. It doesn't mean that no other fish in the sea matter. It doesn't mean that none of the other fish matter. It means that, that the whales are endangered. Yeah. So we're speaking about, an endangered species of humanity. And and if we can understand that, if we can understand save the whales, if we can understand save the snow leopards, if we can understand, save a species of bird, if we can understand saving a species of plant, if we can understand saving a tree, then why can we not understand, saving a species of humanity? And that's what the Black Lives Matter movement is really about.
Mm.
The other thing I spoke about very clearly was when they painted the mural, was that I wanted the people in that community to treat that mural as if it were sacred ground, as if it were and it is a totem to all the lives that have been lost and all the lives that may be threatened in the future, to allow the painting not to be marred or ruined in any way, but to revere it with a certain kind of honor, if you will, to honor it. And that became almost prophetic, right? Which is very interesting right now, because in New York City, in the last few days, we've been dealing with people destroying, the Black Lives Matter murals, like the one outside of the Trump Plaza, the one, and then they hit the one in Brooklyn as well that I inaugurated. I think they've also thrown paint or destroyed the one in Harlem. From what I understand, these are pro-Trump supporters, make America great again, enthusiasts and whatever. So it really brings home the fact that we are in a divided country right now. And not only are we in a divided country and a divided moment, but we have someone at the helm of this country who is actually antagonizing and further advocating that divisiveness. And it sort of brings it all home to me in a very clear way that we need to recover the damage that has been done over the last 4 years by this administration, but certainly, even more importantly, the damage that has been done over the last 200 years since, the founding of this country. And we need to deal with the damage that has been done to our psyche, to our social understanding of who we are, to our language and how we define each other, to how we perceive each other, to our realms of love and hatred and tolerance and intolerance, and education. We really have been damaged and in so many ways. And so there's so much work for America, and not just America, but for the world to do, psychically, intellectually, spiritually. So this moment is, I think, bringing that to everyone's minds. I would like to think that it's bringing it to everyone's minds. And that's what I've been focused on.
Yeah, no, this is, it is a stunning moment, and we are too close, I think, even to really understand. And even with these talks, we're trying to catch a little bit of that reality about this for everybody. And I mean, at the one day in April, it was over 800 dead people. New York City, luckily, has now 5 or 6 days without corona-related deaths. But in the corona neighborhood, funny enough, as by the name in Queens, up to 70% people had it. People who are on the fringes a bit more of the city, the disenfranchised, the minorities. So it's an X-ray of the world we live in, actually. As you said, we all in bubbles, but...
And then within that, we're also living with the fact that even with the coronavirus, Black and brown bodies or Black people are disproportionately, affected. There's a higher rate of people who are actually dying from the virus, and those people are Black. And it's not because of melanin. It's not because, that they've got this complexion, but it's because of pre-existing, from what I think I understand, pre-existing conditions that really make the pandemic or make the virus life-threatening. And so everything from high blood pressure to diabetes and all of those things. And so that brings home, so it's like, in one way, we've got hundreds of thousands of people who are dying, but then we've got all these Black people who are dying disproportionately, from the virus, and then you've got all these people who are dying at the hands of police brutality. And then you've got, the threat of your own health, your own safety, that one is concerned about, whether you're Black or white or whatever one considers oneself, and trying to find peaceful ways to shelter at home, and people who are finding that very difficult. And then, of course, the complications that come with sheltering at home for some people. We've seen divorce rates go up. We've seen families really have to reckon with each other in ways that they had not before, because they're spending so much time with each other. There is no theater, there is no film, there are no outlets, there's no place to go to. So we're living in a very strange moment, but it's not a moment that is, it is a moment unlike any other moment that I've lived in. But I must say that it's not unlike other moments in history. There have been moments like this. There have been moments of quarantine. There have been moments of pandemic. There have been moments of upheaval. You know, there have been moments of, you know, public safety being threatened. You know, we've, you know, we've gone through it. We've read about it. We've learned it in school, and now we're actually in the throes of it. And so, even in that way, it makes me understand that this moment is not new. You know, this moment is not new. You know, pandemics are not new. You know, there have been pandemics, you know, for centuries, and there have been people who, yeah, there have been plagues and black plagues, so-called, you know, irony that it would be called a black plague, right?
Yeah.
But there have been black plagues and all kinds of, you know, viruses and things where people just saw people dying left and right. In my lifetime, I've lived through, I guess, obviously the last huge, I mean, I know there was a SARS pandemic prior to this, but somehow I don't know that I took that as seriously. But I would say the last pandemic that I took as seriously as this one was the AIDS pandemic, you know, and how it was affecting people, and how it affected people's social lives, how it affected people's sex lives, how it affected people's sense of intimacy and culture. So having survived just a fraction, a small fraction of pandemics in my life, and having survived just a fraction of administrations that I find distasteful, and also personally threatening to my life and to my way of life and to the arts and to the economy. I am aware that if I were 300 years old, none of this would seem incredibly new. That, you know, that I would be aware of the fact that the world has gone through these cycles again and again and again and again, and for some reason still has not learned the lessons that it needs to learn. I mean, there is no lesson that we need to learn that's ever going to change the fact that pandemics will come and go. There's no lesson that we're going to learn that's going to, you know, I think ever prevent pandemics, you know, from ever happening. But there are lessons about how to get through them that we can learn from the past. There are lessons that we need to learn about police brutality. There are lessons that we need to learn about culture. There are lessons that we need to learn about racism. There are lessons that we need to learn about sheltering. There are lessons that we need to learn about ourselves and about our families. So, and you know, how to repair ourselves and check in with ourselves and be very clear that that sometimes we're running too fast, doing too much, and not slowing down enough. You know, that we're living in an Epicurean kind of we're living in an Epicurean cultural existence that distracts us from the things that are more important. So I think this is almost like the universe. It's almost like the universe is literally telling everybody to sit down, shelter, think, and meditate, and face yourself. You know, look at yourself, deal with yourself, look at each other, and figure out who you are socially, politically, culturally, and of course physically.
Mm. Yeah. How was it for you? Were you able to write or meditate or something? How did you spend the days as an artist? How was it?
Well, as an artist, I tend to be a homebody, you know, as a writer especially. So this is not that hard for me, to be honest. I'm used to being in the house and to writing, and so yes, I have been able to write, and it's been wonderful. It's been terrific, and I've been researching a lot, and I've been going through you know, pages and pages and pages of you know, documents and things regarding other periods in time. I've also, like I said, other than my work with the Black Lives Matter movement, I've also been working with, you know, trying to figure out how to keep, you know, a theater company afloat, and the commissions that we had going, Mabou Mines specifically, because we had some young artists that we had commissioned as part of something called the Sweet Space, and so when all of this changed, I found myself having to, not just alone, but with Mabou Mines, I had found myself figuring out how to involve them in the idea of theater as a virtual performative project, which is a wonderful and interesting thing. I mean, to imagine that theater, because of the world that we're living in right now, theater cannot happen in the way that we're used to. We're used to it being a very social thing, a very tangible thing. We're used to it being about a building. And if you subtract the idea of the building or the structure or the architecture of theater from the performative aspects of theater, then what do you have? Well, you still hopefully have ideas. You still have creativity. You can still have performance. You still can have exchange, but it might happen via internet. You know, it might have to happen through live streaming, and that's what we've been doing. So I acted in a piece that was live streamed on Zoom, directed by Regina Taylor, called Loving Kindness During Quarantine, with a bunch of playwrights. I'm now trying to structure this program that I'm working on with these young artists who are supposed to perform their work live at Mabou Mines. Now we're changing it so that they can figure out how to adapt their own performative pieces for video, so that people can see it in this medium, you know, and to encourage them and to let them understand that actually there is something wonderful about this, because when you go to see a play, usually it's you buy a ticket to see a play, and whoever's in that theater to see that play at that moment are the people who are witnessing that play. Well, we have another opportunity right now, and the opportunity is that if we're doing it through Zoom or doing it through, you know, social media, there's an opportunity that many more people than are inhabiting the same space can actually witness a work live. Do you know what I mean? So one can actually have a play online that is broadcast in Los Angeles, and that is, you know, broadcast in, you know, like live television. I mean, it's like, you know, it's all over, or all over the world that anyone can access, you know, at the same time, and can write and can actually even, you know, chat if they wanted to, you know, and respond or have responses to the thing that they're seeing. It changes how we approach theater, and I've been challenged to try to, you know, work very hard with a bunch of like-minded people who are involved in that process for right now.
Well, it will be interesting how you and Mabou Mines and that space, that PS, that space, what answers you will find. And I think everybody is looking, is interested. Artists also need to work. They need encouragement, I think, most of all. And this is something you do. Did something change for you in this time? Did you, the time you spent with yourself, as you said, to look at, did you find something that's different now after these months?
Yes, I mean, I certainly, I think I found that there were, and maybe not unlike many other people, I found that there were people that had not, because of the quarantine and because of this isolation, I found that there were some people who I had somehow had no way of getting in touch with, you know, for whatever reason, and some of those people were very unnecessary in my life. You know, prior to the quarantine, I was, you know, and what I mean by that is that when everything is available to you, you tend to consume everything. You know, if you're, you know, again, Epicurean, if you're passionate about anything and about pleasure. And so it's restricted, you know, who I can actually identify as or think of as, you know, family and friends and the people that I actually need in my life, and the people who I define as part of my coalition. So that's been wonderful to begin to redefine, you know, my own coalition principles, to redefine my own objectives, to redefine my own personal goals for the future, to redefine the books, redefine how I manage time or have mismanaged time, and to you know, allow myself the time to read the books that I haven't read and that I intended to read, to learn the things that I needed to learn, to reach out to people, and also to try to help people, I guess, psychologically, because that's been also part of the process. Part when the quarantine first happened, I was ending the school year and I had to teach my college students in this forum, which was new to me and new to them. And many of them were dealing with depression, clearly, and they were, you know, young students who were dealing with just, you know, feeling depressed about what was happening. And so some of the syllabus, in a way, kind of went away, or was sacrificed for psychotherapy sessions, where I became the listener, or I moderated, or I tried to encourage the conversation, and then lead it back to what we were really there to discuss and learn. But it sort of rebranded and even changed how I teach. That teaching has a personal level to it. You know, that teaching in academia should always have a very, you know, that it should have a very personal level to it, that you should pay attention to the people that are in the room that you are teaching and actually care about them in the moment, so that they're able to understand what you're trying to impart to them. So it's changed. My values have been adjusted and are adjusted. My objectives are adjusting. My sense of self and identity is adjusting, not shifting, not changing. I'm not becoming anyone else. I'm still Carl Hancock Rux. You know, I will still be a writer when this is over. If I survive this, I will still be who I am. But how I perform my identity and perform my many roles in the universe has been absolutely adjusted. And in that way, no different than what's happened in the past. Because when I lived through the HIV/AIDS pandemic, you know, and my older brother died, and half of the kids in my high school died, it absolutely adjusted and how I lived. You know, I was thrust into a world. You know, it made me get out of this country. It made me, you know, go to the University of Paris. It made me go to the University of Ghana at Legon. It made me decide to become an artist, because I didn't know how long, you know, I would live, or how long any of us would live. And I didn't want to be, you know, 20 years old, and having died without having expressed myself or articulated myself. You know, there's a saying that, it's not a saying, but there's something that someone very important said to me one time, and I always say this, and if you don't mind, I'll repeat it. But it's a quote by Dr. Bernice Johnson Regan, who is an anthropologist and who is a singer and who's the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock. Many years ago, she said to me, when we worked on a project together with the director Robert Wilson in Paris, she said to me, there comes a time in your life when you discover an emptiness. You have no thought of yourself as being empty. And in fact, you've been operating as if you were not. But there it is, this emptiness. And when you discover it, nothing hurts as much as that emptiness, except your yearning to be full. And that's when, for the first time in your life, And the first time with your life, you search for a tongue, a language, a means of articulation. And that's what happened to me through the HIV/AIDS pandemic. That's what's happened to me in this Black Lives Matter movement. That's what's happened to me with this coronavirus pandemic. Constantly becoming aware of one's emptiness, the emptiness that you had been ignoring or not treating, and so in discovering it, you then have to deal with how to heal it or cure it or fill that space. And in finding ways to fill the space of your own emptiness that you discover, and that can only come with personal self-examination, you finally start to develop or yearn for an articulation of ideology and of feelings and of an articulation of being that you had never ever considered before. And so this becomes incredibly important. I think that every moment that challenges us, another statement I should say that she said once is that life's challenges are not meant to paralyze you. They're supposed to show you who you are. And so I do not feel paralyzed. I don't feel paralyzed in this moment. I feel like I am finding out who I am. And I hope that for the rest of my life, I will constantly be discovering who I am. And not only me, but I hope that we will always be forced against a wall to discover who we are and how we are communicating with each other and what we are saying to each other and whether or not we are paying attention to each other's socioeconomic realities and race realities and gender realities. How are we interacting? Who are we voting into governance? Who are we supporting? Who are we not supporting that should be supported? What do we understand about capitalism? What do we understand about socialism? What do we understand about some kind of an ism that we've never heard of before, but could possibly be invented that could actually be a new way for society to manage itself. So this is a really important moment, and I think this moment cannot be taken lightly for any of us. Not for any of us. We cannot take this moment lightly. We are being forced to think about injustice. We are being forced to think about family. We're being forced to think about health. We're being forced to think about racism. We're being forced to think about police brutality. We're being forced to think about the prison system. We're being forced to think about our own economy. We're being forced to think about how we spend our time. We're being forced to think about who we spent our time with prior to this moment. We're being forced to think about whether or not there was any value in that at all. We're being forced to think about who we need to spend time with should we survive this moment. We're being forced to think about survival. We're being forced to think about the métier of our existence. And if we really pay attention to that, if we really commit ourselves to that, if we really challenge ourselves with all of those things and more, we personally could actually come out of this moment finessed and absolutely changed in the most magnificent way. I would hate to think that any of us would just hide away, hope maybe we don't, catch the virus, and hope that maybe nobody throws a brick through our windows because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then when it's all over, or when it seems like it's all over, just go back to our way of living and walking down the street and living in our own shelter and living in our own bubble, and ignoring everybody else's needs and ignoring all the people around us. If we do that, then we've missed this gift. This is a gift. This moment is a gift. And that's how I perceive it. I perceive it as a wonderful gift from the universe. Even with the, and I don't mean to make light of anybody who's died or has lost anyone or who's been sick. I'm not making light of that. But one must embrace the positive and the negative in order to understand that there is something still to do with all of it. Every wound, every death, every sickness, every challenge, every upheaval comes with something to teach you something, to understand something about yourself in the future.
So yeah, that's a significant realization. It makes me think there's this little Brecht poem of story of Mr. K. He wrote lots of little stories, and Mr. K meets a friend. The friend looks at him and said, "Oh, you haven't changed at all." And Mr. K turns pale, turns around and walks away, and he thought, so maybe this is a moment in Corona.
Yeah, how sad that would be. How sad that would be. Oh, you haven't changed at all. Someone, that's so great you said that to me. Someone asked me that. I was walking down the street yesterday with my mask on, and I saw a friend, and she from across the street, and of course we kept our distance, and she said hello, and I was like, "Hi, how are you?" And she said, I said, "How are you?" And so she said, "Oh, we're talking through our masks, and then she said, she was telling me that her birthday was coming up, and I was like, "Oh, congratulations!" And then she said, "Do I look any older? Do I look any different?" And I said, "No, you look fine." But I was just trying to compliment you. I didn't want to make and she didn't. I mean, she looked absolutely fine. But I thought about that, and I was like, well, actually, I know what she was asking me. Did she look like? Had she aged? Had time aged her? Had this this moment of sheltering, has that aged her? Has it taken away? And she's a very beautiful woman, but I guess so. I guess there was some vanity to the question, I'm going to assume, and in this, do I look any different? When she was asking me that, and I almost wanted to go back to her and say, shouldn't you look different? Shouldn't you look a day older? Shouldn't you? Not weathered, not beaten down, but shouldn't you look a little wiser, look a little smarter? Shouldn't there be a little Fraulein here that you didn't have before, that you now really embrace, and it's wonderful? I mean, let's think about that. I mean, let's think about just the before this moment, of what we were doing to ourselves and to our bodies, even in American and all kinds of cultures, right? The idea of Botox, the idea of paralyzing our faces with venoms that would render us expressionless, all as a way to cheat, time, and to help us believe or think that we actually looked younger than we actually were. Why would we, or why should we? And I'm not making a judgment necessarily, but I'm using this really as more of a metaphor than anything. Why should we paralyze ourselves from the events of our lives? We should not. We should wear them proudly on our faces if we can.
Yeah. You mentioned students. I think you teach at Yale, right? If I'm right.
No, I don't. So I don't teach Yale right now. I was teaching at the New School, and I was also teaching with NYU Stella Adler, Voice for Actors. So that's.
How did you get into theater? When you said, how did you start out as a kid and all of it? Tell us a little bit.
Too long of a story, my God. But
we have time.
Okay, all right. I was, my mother was paranoid schizophrenic. I was raised in the New York City foster care system. I was adopted by my grandmother's brother and his wife. They were much older than me. So it was my grand uncle and his wife who adopted me. My grand uncle was born in 1915. His wife was born in 1923. They'd been born and raised in Harlem. They were music enthusiasts, and they loved jazz music and had lived through all the great eras of jazz in Harlem. So I was living with people who were generations older than me and who were, you know, something like I like to think of I like to think of them as they were sort of like ethnomusicologists. Every Saturday night they would pull out their records, their vinyl records, and play music and force me to listen to, you know, Miles Davis and Coltrane and things that I didn't understand. And they would listen to it with their ear in such a way that was very strange, spooky, almost to me at the time, because they would, you know, say things like, "Oh, did you hear what the sound that horn made? Did you understand, you know, how you know the tonality, you know, of that saxophone? Did you you know, as if these instruments, you know, this instrumental jazz music was actually speaking language to them, and that they were having a conversation with, you know, this music. And I thought it was the strangest, weirdest thing in the world, but it was also a fascinating thing. They were artists and they were thinkers. I began to, I think, listen to music and then listen to the world that way. And also, as you know, when I was very young, I think in elementary school, I worked with, I was in a young actors program, worked with a woman named Nima Barnett, who is a well-known African-American female director still in Hollywood, the first African-American female director to direct primetime television, but at that time, she was heading a children's theater company, and I was working with them, just trying to, you know, come out of my shell and embrace myself and deal with my, you know, my existence and try to interact with other children. I loved it, loved the idea of theater, loved the ideas of plays, loved the idea of reading plays. My mother was an avid reader, so I was, you know, 9 and 10 years old reading the books that were on her shelf, everything from Baldwin to Jean Genet to Hemingway to Ralph Ellison to Richard Wright. And she would encourage this, and this was very important to her, that I would, you know, read these things. In fact, even reading theory or philosophy, you know, so this was, even though I didn't quite understand it and was probably too young to understand a lot of it. But the more I read, the more I fell in love with language. And then as I, so there's two things happening. One is I was being taught to listen to language that was nonverbal by my parents, right? So nonverbal language, which is music. Then at the same time, I was being taught to participate in language, which was theater, which was performance, and to allow the language that someone else had written to come into my body and into my mouth and out of my mouth, and to perform it. Then I was also being taught to read language and comprehend language and perceive language and sit with it silently, and to become fascinated and to see what it did to my psyche and to my soul. And this is all before I'm 12 years old. So I knew that I wanted to be a writer. And I, even though I was very, very attracted to all of the art forms. I mean, I was visual art, dance. I was attracted to all of it, but I knew I wanted to be a writer. Went to the LaGuardia School for Music and the Performing Arts as a visual artist, strangely enough, because I felt like I understood the other mediums and I wanted to know something more about drawing. And there I'm being taught the language of seeing and interpreting and making with my hands, the language of color, the language of, you know, shape and shadow, the language of drawing and painting, you know, the language of linseed oil and paint and smell and all these things. You know, what is that? To make an object, to sculpt even, you know, I mean, that is the discourse. So it was an incredible thing. And then also at that time, there were people around me in that school who were singers and actors. And I'm listening to these incredible young students who are singing the most beautiful songs, arias, classical music, Negro spirituals, jazz, Broadway show tunes. That's what was happening, just like in the movie Fame. I mean, and then there were these dancers, these kids walking down the hallways in their tights and their ballet slippers, and I couldn't stop watching them, articulate something with their bodies. And I was learning the language of kineticism. I mean, really the language of, how the body can actually speak, non-verbally, but speak, by just using your limbs and your muscles and stretching your limbs and your muscles. That every position that we make, and is itself a sentence, which is true of all language. Language is not just the sound that comes out of our mouths. And this made me passionate about the arts. I then went to I went to Columbia College. I went to the American University of Paris, and I went to the University of Ghana at Legon. But I did not become a professional artist until, with all of those things that the universe had been preparing me for, I didn't become a professional artist until that pandemic, that HIV/AIDS pandemic, had affected the life of my older brother. And I was working for the city of New York in child welfare administration, and working with a lot of social workers. And I was also working as a social work trainer. So and that's what I partially studied actually at NYU, actually was social work, because I wanted to understand something more about, like, the politics of the world and the politics of of society, and how we get through them, and how we mandate change. And when my brother became very ill, I became his advocate. I had to become the person who advocated for his health care, who advocated for his hospital stay, who advocated for his shelter, who advocated for his food, who advocated, he literally was losing his mind. He had dementia. And I loved him. I adored him. He was 20 years older than me, but he was a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful man who had been stricken by this horrible, horrible, horrible disease and could not help himself and was withering away. So I had to sort of put down all of these, aspirations and goals, and actually sort of join the world and figure out, how does the world operate? What does the world do? And who am I? And how do I find out how to become an advocate for my brother? And in becoming an advocate for my brother, I think I learned how to become an advocate for myself, and how to become an advocate for other people as well. And after I lost him, when he died, and I shouldn't say that, I shouldn't say lost him, because I didn't lose him. He physically died. I gained him. As I continued to gain him, and I mean that in a psychic way, I entered this realm of becoming a playwright because I wanted to commemorate him. So my very first play, which was done on 44th Street, 9th Avenue in Manhattan, was about him. And it was not just about him, but was also about all the Black young men and women and people who were living, it was almost like the play was called Song of Sad Young Men. It's directed by Trezana Beverly, and it was sort of like it was a bunch of people in a bar, pontificating and talking. And it was sort of a lower depths kind of play. And, in where, these people are living in this structure that's very dark, and they're living through very dark and dangerous times. And they're facing each other and facing their own mortality and dealing with each other. And that's really how I entered professionally this realm of art making, of becoming a professional artist, as a way of commemorating my brother, who had just died, because I didn't want to die without having said something about my existence and my life and about him and the lessons that I had learned. And then on and on and on. You're strangely quiet.
No, no, that's, tell a bit more how you, what do you, why theater? If you really, if I understand, it could be drawing, could have been social work, it could have been perhaps movement or music.
That's true.
You're a
Absolutely.
musician. Why theater?
Because I knew that theater actually would be the one form that, well, I knew that I wanted to be a writer first and foremost. And the other reason is that theater was the only form that I could think of that was accessible to me that actually brought all those things together for me, you know? So in theater, I could have music. In theater, I could have dance. In theater, I could have visual art. In theater, I could have color. In theater, I could have singing. You know, in theater, I could have language. You know, so you know, it was possible. You know, in visual art, as I had learned it, I had not learned to be a visual artist as a performance artist, as a performative visual artist. So I didn't know anything about, you know, performative visual art. So that was not, I was not aware of that. That's, I'll just say that. Even in learning to training to sing, which I did, sang with the Harlem Boys Choir, and studied voice. I'd learned a lot about singing and reading and how wonderful that could be. But somehow I wondered whether or not singing was enough. It was, you know what? It wasn't enough for me. It wasn't quite enough. But in theater offered this possibility of bringing all of these things into the room, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I was able to do, and that's what I did, and continue to do. You know, I mean, it's why working with, you know, people like, what, you know, I've worked with, when I was telling you about Bernice Johnson Regan and having worked with her. Well, the piece I was working with her on was an opera that I was performing in, Temptation of St. Anthony. We were touring all over Europe, and it was directed by Robert Wilson. And so people know Robert Wilson as this great, you know, avant-garde, you know, theater director, which he is. But you know, he's more than that. You know, I mean, you know, he went to Pratt to study visual art, and more than that, he was also studying architecture, or you know, the notion of, you know, building and structures, you know, and then shapes, right? And then more than that, you know, because of his own personal life, he was thinking about how theater communicates in very simple ways, or in uncomplicated, I should say, uncomplicated ways, complicated but uncomplicated ways. You know, while being very colorful, you know, but it didn't necessarily have to be a heightened language. You know, so that's something that he has spoken of greatly, about how he's drawn to, even in his blocking or his directing, you know, very almost box-like, you know, actors on stage, you know, the movement, which is its own dance, you know, like kabuki, or it's its own dance of simplicity in order to mimic or interpret humanity. And then because of art, he's, you know, he's this brilliant theater director and lighting designer who then saturates the stage with all of these colors and takes you into a world you've never seen. Also, I had gone, when I was a teenager, I was accepted into a program called the Harlem Youth Writers Workshop. And it was led by a man named George Davis, another man named Frank Dexter Brown. It was a way of teaching children, teenagers, journalism. And it was actually housed at Columbia University, and it was funded by the Xerox Corporation. And when I was there, I decided that I would become an arts writer because I was already in an arts world. And so I thought that I would, you know, that would be appropriate for me, because each child, made their own decisions about what kind of a journalist they wanted to be, or how they would want to study journalism. And I was like, well, let me try to understand arts journalism or arts criticism. And so I was going to see plays and going to see Broadway plays. And in seeing these Broadway plays, I was sucked into these worlds that were, I can remember it like it was yesterday, just the beauty and the magic. And nothing else did that for me, not even film. The magic of knowing that I was in the same room as other human bodies, but the difference was that the other human bodies were on stage and I was in a seat, and that the people who were on stage were walking in and out of light, and were either singing or speaking or both, and were telling stories to me in that room at that moment. And so there was an energy, there was something that was literally being passed from me, and it was just a few feet away from me. And if I wanted to, if I could actually reach out and touch these people. It's not on a screen. It wasn't technical. It was technical, but all theater, everything has its technology. But I mean, it wasn't. There was nothing that distanced me from these people who were performing and telling me a story. And so that became magical to me. That people like August Wilson could actually take me into 1930 something Pittsburgh. I'd never imagined being in, I'd never imagined being in the 1930s, and I'd never imagined what that looked like. And I never imagined I had no thought of what Pittsburgh was, and didn't care, or that any player, that anything could actually bring me in, that Mother Courage could bring me to, some realm of society that I recognized but didn't quite recognize. That Shakespeare could actually bring me into a world that I had no knowledge of, yet realized, oh, I do have knowledge of Lear. I do have knowledge of Richard. I do know who Hamlet is. I do understand that, even though it was written, half a millennia before I even came to this planet. And also, even though these writers, the playwrights, didn't know me personally, so many of these plays felt like they were personal gifts to me. That there were times, it's almost like that song, Killing Me Softly, no greater song in the world, I think, lyrically. No greater song in the world. Killing Me Softly with his song, right? I mean, that idea, I thought I heard a song, this whole idea that, it's almost like he'd read my diaries, had my diaries and read each one out loud. That's what theater was like for me, going to see a play. It was almost as if these playwrights had unearthed my diaries and were reading each one of them out loud in many different ways. And that the world was playing some strange, wonderful, magical trick on me that I was willing to take part in. I was like, yeah, let's play. I'll join this. This is what a wonderful game. I mean, if this can happen and can continue to happen, I must be a part of this world. And so that's how theater came into my life.
I remember as Segal, you spoke about Racine, that you, as a kid, you would, read it, but you could imagine family structures because you didn't fully know, your parents, right? And that's an incredible.
Yeah, I think that had a lot to do with it. I think the fact that I was a foster child who had been adopted, who had no relationship with his biological mother, whose history was really unavailable to me, had no knowledge of my biological father, was actually born, I found this out recently, that I was actually, when my mother had me, it was while she was institutionalized. I didn't know that, by the way, when I last talked to you. I thought that that her mental illness happened sometime after I was born, but actually I found out recently that it happened before I was born. She was already institutionalized. It was like a family secret. It was a thing that people were keeping from me for whatever reason. I have no idea, but they were keeping that with me. So she became pregnant while she was actually in this mental institution with me, and there was no way of finding out who my father was, and no one pursued that. So I still don't know and won't know. Um, so I was a child with questions and question marks, and again, that's like I said earlier, so that even the darkest, saddest things in our lives, we must learn to embrace. I mean, it's what Buddhism teaches us, isn't it? I mean, that we must understand the balance of the universe, right? That everything has a purpose and a meaning. And so I was a child who came into this world with question marks, and didn't know how to articulate my questions, but certainly found a way to articulate my questions, to find my own answers, maybe not specifically to who is your father, or why your mother was, paranoid schizophrenic, or why I was born in a mental institution, or, maybe none of those answers could absolutely be answered. But what could be answered were larger questions. And it's the greatest thing too about being an artist, is that one question opens the box to the next question, to the next question, to the next question, until you find 1,000,001 answers that you had never even perceived finding in the first place. So yeah, that had a lot to do with these question marks that were stamped on my soul and stamped on my psyche, had a lot to do with becoming an artist.
Mm. Yeah, it's this, and who we are. You were forced and thrown into it. You really asked it existentially, and for many of us, somehow we seem these questions are answered, but perhaps they are not. We just take superficial explanations. Where do we come from, and where are we going, and what is a father? The idea of a mother and father and family, and what is it?
Well, and so many of us have that. I mean, so many of us have those questions about, it's almost I think almost everybody questions, oh, was my mother and father a good mother or father, or, or did I have a happy childhood, or was everything okay, or could things have been done differently, or could things have been done better, or why did they divorce, or, whatever. Everybody has a story about their family. Everybody has a family story, and, but, it's something to have it with you for your entire life, and to allow it to, to push you further to investigate the world. I think that's to use those questions, and to use those experiences, whether you were adopted or not, whether you were a foster child like me or not, but just to use your own experiences and your questions is very relevant and insurgent for all of us. But to use them, not just have them, because if we just have them, then we can die with them, and they can actually increase our disease before we die with them, and not help us. But if we use them, then we can actually sharpen our instrument and do something while we are here, because we're only here for a certain time. And so that's what learning, and that's what investigating and learning about my own personal history did for me. It made me, and continues to make me, sharpen my instrument, or instruments, my weapons, my armor, my language, my polyglot, my linguistic, my mind, my interactions, my perceptions.
And as you pointed out, this time of Corona is something where it forces us, and it might be something that will save.
Well, if it doesn't, then we've got nothing from it, right? I mean, if we don't do something with this moment, then it's lost. A bunch of people have died for what? Nothing. And I don't think anybody wants that. I mean, and maybe there are people who have a very hard time believing the existential, or the spiritual, and the idea of sort of questioning things, the larger world, or trying to see the greater picture. But I can't help but do that. And I can't think that every single moment that we are on the planet, we are here to learn something to actually increase and better the planet and the place and the moment and the people that inhabit the earth. And so if we don't do that, if we don't use this moment for its purpose, then we've really failed the class.
Yeah, and then we are really lost. But today I got a mail from Tom Walker, who's a long-standing member of the Living Theater, and he wrote a poem about the evil that surrounds us. And he said, theater is not a mirror. He said, again, this old image of, you know, Goethe, you said it's kind of forges. Theater has to engage now and has to promote people to act. How do you see theater? How do you see your theater? What does it do?
Well, I mean, I think I was always, after having seen a lot of theater and lots of different kinds of theater, I think I became clear that I was not into, well, I shouldn't say that the kind of theater I wanted to make was not going to be naturalism necessarily. You know, that it wasn't going to be a, you know, kitchen table kind of, you know, naturalism or realism, you know, that I was interested in theater that, you know, is abstract to some degree or experimental, for lack of a better word, you know, that joined, you know, different mediums and came up with something that I had not seen or had not been witness to. Almost in that way that Toni Morrison says, you know, write the book that you have not read or that you want to read, you know. So I wanted to write the play that that I had not seen and that I wanted to see, and hope that maybe there'd be another me out there in the audience who, you know, that kid that was me long ago that leaned forward and said, you know, maybe everybody in this room isn't getting this, but I'm getting it. I feel this. So I'm passionate about history. I'm passionate about the moment. I'm passionate about the existential, as you can tell. I'm passionate about the abstract. I'm passionate about language, and I'm passionate about ideas. You know, and I've always been passionate about ideas. I think that the theater is a place for discourse. And actually, what I've learned, sorry to make my computer move, what I've learned is that that's what it always was. You know, that it always was meant as that. It was not simply for entertainment purposes. You know, there was a level to it in ancient Greek theater where it may have been propagandistic to the degree of, you know, forcing us to believe one thing or another regarding, you know, who we, you know, what gods we followed or, you know, what armies we followed. But on another level, it was forcing us toward our values and forcing us toward ourselves and forcing us toward something spiritual. So it began this idea of theater as far back as we know it, because I believe it existed even before then. As far as we know it, even with the ancient Greeks, was always political and social and spiritual and abstract and dealt with the many realms of existence. And that's the kind of theater that I'm attracted to in a contemporary way. I always want Dionysus to be in the room, you know, always, you know. I need a Dionysian moment constantly, you know. I need a god to play some dirty trick on me or on a character in order for me to understand something. I need, you know, I need a city. I need Thebes, you know. I need to try to get to it, or at least I need to try to save it. I need to be Pentheus. I need to be Pentheus in that way that I am a son, you know, and a warrior son, and that I am a warrior son who has serious conflict with his father. I need my father to be some great mythic king possibly unavailable to me or in conflict with me or endangering me to some degree, only to, or even trying to impede me, only to compel me. I need love to be something that I have to kill the Minotaur for. You know, I need that. I need that. I need that. I need to step into someone else's garments and perform the role of the other. That's what theater is to me. That is theater. That is absolutely theater to me. That's the kind of theater that I absolutely love. You know, stepping into the garment of something I've never worn, being influenced by a God that I'd never known, challenging another part of my father. And when I say father, just creation, right? Challenging a part of the creation of the universe that I had not yet challenged. Salvaging myself and a city that I had not yet inhabited, or at least trying to get to a city that I've not yet inhabited. You know, those are really important things to me. And just architecture. I mean, strangely enough, for whatever reason, I'm passionate about buildings. I'm passionate about how buildings are structured. I'm passionate about the idea that rooms and doors are used for their emptiness. Thus, we're helped by what is not. So I'm passionate about entryways that let in air, let out air, or trap air in. I'm passionate about derelict buildings and old buildings that trap history and spirits and ghosts. I'm passionate about the stories that even plaster and molding can tell us, and stone and marble, rocks. I'm passionate about the texture of rocks and wood and stone, because they all represent something so much older than I am, and they have a story to tell me. And so that's why theater. It feels less manufactured in a way than, for me, than I guess film or television. And I don't mean that I don't love film or television, but I do mean that theater is the oldest form. It precedes these forms. You know, it birthed those forms, right? It birthed film. It birthed television. But so, you know, why not go to the source? Going back to the source, for me, there's nothing like the source of the thing. You know, that artistic beginning, you know, that form that teaches us more than we could ever possibly know from its offshoot, you know. And so that's why theater for me. And that actually, and also, sorry, oh, I was gonna say, and that also, you know, I can hate it or love it. You know, I mean, how great is that? You know, and then I can, you know, or that I can walk out in an intermission and not understand it. My favorite moment, you know, I think that I always get wrong, and I think I need to learn how to quote this, but I know I've read this, is in Proust, you know, where there's a character who sees a play and decides that he hates the play, you know, and, you know, he just can't stand it. He's sitting there, he's watching the play, and he's like, oh, this is awful. Oh, this is intolerable. I can't take this. And then he waits, you know, he waits until the play is over and he leaves. And as he's walking through the street, you know, he suddenly remembers something that someone said in the first act, you know, and thinks, oh, what a clever statement that was. And he remembers something about the garment or the dress, you know, that the actress wore, you know, in the second act, and how beautiful that garment was, and how it flowed, and how the light hit it, you know. And he remembers something about the relationship between one character and another character. And suddenly, in the middle of the street, as he's on his way home, leaving the theater that presented the play that he thought he hated, he learns he loved. You know, he suddenly discovers that he actually loves the play because he's gotten to live with it and learn it and question it and hate it. and learn to love it, and to allow it to, have some real relationship to his thinking and being.
Yeah.
Theater's, it's this passionate, strange, crazy, mystical world. In the same way that, almost like, church, or, I love the theater of things. I mean, I love the theater of, I was talking to someone else about how much I love the theater of Catholicism. I don't know, I'm not Catholic, I don't know that, but I don't know what these incense things are, but I think they're beautiful. I mean, my God, when you see these things that are, and the priests have got this, even in a movie, and you see it, and it's got, I don't even know what to call it. That's how dumb I am. But I mean, this lovely brass, thing, whatever, with the smoke coming from it and whatever in there, and it's on a chain. Who invented that and why? And what does that represent? Is that supposed to represent the spirit? Who invented the garments? Of these priestly garments, these robes, these colors, these songs, espiritu. What are they singing? Who are they singing to? What are the songs of the angels? Where are the angels? What are the angels? Are they here? What are those? Who are those people made in glass that are windows? Really nothing more than glass in window frames, but colored glass, reflecting light into a space, so that, but forcing me to look up at them and see them and ponder who they are and what stories they're telling. I mean, I love the theater of rituals. I love the theater of, like I said, of church, of rituals, of dance, and that's all of these things are theater for me. Mm. Conversation is its own theater, and I love the theater of conversation. Even though I tend to dominate it sometimes, like I'm doing right now, but I love the theater of conversation. Yeah, I look at people and I'm fascinated with them, and I can't stop. I was the kid who my mother would have to slap my hand a little bit because I would stare at people, I just stare at them for whatever reason, because I wanted to know who they were behind everything. I would look at you and like, wow, you can look at you right now. I mean, I could easily just sit and stand and stare at you all day and wonder about your story, and wonder about the country you come from, and wonder about why you part your hair in the middle, and wonder about why you chose those glasses, and wonder about, why you're wearing that specific shirt, and wonder about the white wall that you're sitting in front of, but knowing that possibly outside of the frame of this computer, the walls have to be, must be, something else other than what I see, that they at least turn, or that they make another shape, that it's not just a flatness, right? Mm-hmm. That it's not just a flat plane that's behind you, and that maybe there's a picture to your right, and maybe there's a desk to your left, and I wonder, I can't help, I'm nosy, it's like and it's like Zora Neale Hurston. It's why I believe in research. The great anthropologist and novelist Zora Neale Hurston said that all research is poking and prying with a purpose. And that's what I do. I poke and I pry with a purpose. And the purpose is really that to understand something more about me. So I'm looking at you, wondering who you are, because I'm still trying to figure out something about who I am and who we are. Yeah. And our relationship to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is important. This is a time where we can and should do this, and where we can learn and see the world, how it really is, besides the fact how we process it, become aware of the fact that with our own VR headsets, we are actually processing the world, and everybody is in a way isolated, and that we have to be able to get an idea for the different ways of understanding. It's really, really good to hear from you, and to your reflections and what we're saying, and we are over time and out of time. But before we go, what inspires you? What are you reading at the moment, or listening to? What, or in Corona, what did something show up on the horizon you were surprised about?
Oh, there was many questions. Which one do you want me to answer?
What comes to your mind? Yeah.
Well, the reading at the moment, which answers also the surprise question, is that I was walking down the street the other day, and you know, people in my neighborhood sometimes put down on their stoop things that they're getting rid of, you know, cups or glasses or books. And I came across this Patti Smith book that she was writing about her time living in this neighborhood.
Just Kids.
Right, with Robert Mapplethorpe. Mm-hmm. And I had actually just seen the film, but I'm fascinated about that period in time and all the many people who've gone to Pratt and whatever. So I picked that up, and so I'm reading that. Just because I picked it up and it called out to me, and I'm that way about books. You know, I mean, they have to call me. You know, I mean, very rarely are they even suggested to me. I mean, they literally call me. You know, I'm also reading these essays by Toni Morrison, and other than that, so those are some surprises. And then other than that, I'm researching some things about people about. Well, you know what? This is a continued research. I was researching last night for hours and hours and hours about Greenwich Village and about the Minettas, you know, Minetta Lane and Minetta Place, and about the 19th century citizens who lived in that area and the people into the early 20th century, and about the, you know, the little Africa that is no more, that once existed in that area, and then the you know, the incoming of, you know, the Italians to America and dominating what we know as Greenwich Village, you know, the south part of Greenwich Village, and that culture, and all the many characters who were prominent and a part of the bohemian lifestyle of the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s in the Greenwich Village, you know, and what they were studying, you know, from Gurdjieff to just to you know, this notion of their journals, and I mean that I'm researching that for a reason. I'm working on a project actually. So, but that became, and I'm finding out things that I still had not found out, and I've been studying that and researching that for 20 odd years, and thought that I knew everything there was to know, and I found things last night I never knew or maybe forgotten. So it was amazing.
That is great. So this time maybe is a time to find out what we never knew about or what we forgot, and it was really, really important and significant to hear from you what lessons you draw, how you use it, what it means to you, and how you create meaning. And I think we need that. It is a time where we are lost, and as we are anyway in our existence, but we have to now. We are called to create meaning. There's no imposing structure. For better or worse, I think it's better so. We don't need it, but we are the ones now who have to do it. And you made a great contribution to that, just for me, and I'm also sure for people who listen to it, and artists and everyone. So really, really, thank you for joining us. Melanie Joseph has, why the hell haven't you talked to Kaliat? You know, and,
I love her to death.
Yeah, I tried to. Somehow we didn't fully connect. So it's great that you were here. Tomorrow we continue our journey, listening to theater artists. It is Philippe Ken, who is from Paris, who runs Théâtre des Amandiers in Nanterre, and is involved in many things, significant things, and his practice of theater and what he calls of the small things, or little things. We will find out what he will say to us. Betty Chamier, a playwright, she's moves now between New York and San Francisco from the Arab American theater community. And Friday we have Adelheid Rosen from the Netherlands in Harlem, where she is in Amsterdam, really creating a stunning amount of work and engaging with the communities and creating work that resonates with them. Actually, Melanie will be there and talk with her. They are will use this also as a way of connection. They have a relation with each other. So hopefully this will also bring them closer together. Carl, really, thank you. It was so significant and important to hear from you. Thank you for taking the time, and I can't wait to see your next play, or the one about, or your work, or opera, or where you act in. And so, you know, stay tuned, stay connected to us, to our listeners. Really, thank you for taking the time. What Carl had to say is significant, and it has an impact if you choose to do so. And it might be something in there that changes you, or maybe things have already changed just listening to him and observing him. It almost looks like somehow also like a little Orson Welles shot. It could almost look like a ceiling, and you are standing and looking down to us, where he had these, you know, ceilings close to the actors. So that was really, really an important contribution. Thank you for doing this, and to listeners for taking time out. So much we have to do, so much is on our minds. So it means a lot that you are here with us. For HowlRound, to hosting us, and to the Segal team and the Segal Center and the Graduate Center. So really, thank you. I hope you all stay safe, wear a mask. It's not a political thing. It makes common sense. We heard the story of a barbershop or two haircutters got a clean bill, a negative test, but it was wrong. They were positive, but they had kept their mask on for 2 weeks. They kept cutting hair and nobody got it. So it really protected the people who came in with masks, and it does work. And let's keep safe. So stay tuned. Hope to hear from you soon, and see you all again. And all my best. And again, Carl, really, thank you.
Thank you so much.